I know that I won't be the first person to be wrongly convicted and possibly wrongly sentenced for either life in prison or the death penalty. And personally, if I had my choice, I would take the death penalty because I don't want to spend the rest of my life in prison.
We introduced you to Jodi Arias back in 2009 when she sat down to be interviewed by 48 Hours shortly after being arrested and charged with the murder of her ex-boyfriend, Travis Alexander. Since then, she's become a national sensation, the focus of newspaper and magazine profiles, and the subject of 24-hour cable news coverage. I met Jodi Arias at the Estrella jail 4.5 years ago when she agreed to tell CBS News her story of how Travis Alexander had been murdered, an interview which for the first time in the history of 48 Hours was used as evidence in a death penalty trial.
Just give me the gist of what you were doing here in this place today.
Today, I am interviewing with you. I've been charged with first-degree murder of my friend, Travis Alexander, and I'm just here to have a conversation with you about it.
During this 3-hour interview, Jodi told us a tale of secret intimacy.
There was an attraction, and, it found an outlet on occasion.
That's a very creative way of saying it. It found an outlet.
The drama of masked intruders.
There were two individuals walking toward us, and I just heard a loud bang, and Travis was screaming.
And ultimately, a desperate escape.
He was holding the gun at my forehead. He pulled the trigger, and nothing happened with the gun. And so I just grabbed my purse, and I ran down the stairs and out of there, and I left him there.
It was an incredible story.
So at that point, I remember pulling over again at the Hoover Dam, and I thought, I'm going to call Travis. And I tried calling him, and it just went to voicemail, and I called him again, and it went to voicemail.
As it turned out, that incredible story was an incredible lie.
Would you agree that you're the person who actually slit Mr. Alexander's throat from ear to ear?
Yes.
Jodi Arias killed Travis Alexander. There is no question about it. The million-dollar question is what would have forced her to do it.
At her trial, Jodi Arias told the world a new story.
It was Travis's continual abuse. It had reached a point of no return.
I grabbed the gun, and he was chasing me. I turned around, and I didn't even know that I shot him.
Weaving a tale of fear and abuse.
He called me a bitch, and he kicked me in the ribs.
Why didn't you call the police?
I would have never called the police on Travis. I was loyal to him.
We go back to the beginning, returning to our first meetings with Jodi for insight into the mind of a killer.
Is it at all possible, that day that you were together, you had a fight, you had an argument, and you just had enough?
No, we didn't argue at all that day.
Something happened in her to trigger this tremendous amount of rage.
Was he ever abusive to you in any way?
He lost his temper a few times. I never felt my life was in danger.
Jodi gave us secrets in those interviews. She gave us an insight right into what she is thinking.
He had a girlfriend who he was having a relationship with, but he was still having you on the side.
Yeah.
Did you know that that relationship was going on?
No, I would never allowed him and I to continue to behave the way we did had I known.
Like Casey Anthony and O.J. Simpson before her, Jodi Arias captured the attention of the country.
Arias pelted his lies.
On the Jodi Arias trial.
Jodi Arias.
Looking back at these interviews, it would appear that Jodi thought she could fool everyone.
I don't believe that I'm going to be convicted. I don't think that I'm going to spend one day in prison.
State of Arizona versus Jodi Ann Arias.
But in the end, Jodi Arias could not have been more wrong.
We, the jury, do find the defendant guilty.
I know that people will look at me and say, oh yeah, he really meant a lot to you, didn't he? By the way that you just left him there. Not only that, they think that this is a fabrication and that I was the one that murdered him.
I'm Maureen Maher, tonight on 48 Hours. Unraveling the lies of Jodi Arias.
I have nothing but time on my hands to think. And that's when I really began to try and remember and relive that day. And then it just gets so horrible that I shut it out and I don't want to think about it.
lots of blood.
It all started in 2008. When Travis Alexander was found dead in his bathroom, the first question homicide investigator Esteban Flores had was who? When did you first hear the name Jodi Arias?
We heard that name from day one. There were certain individuals who gave us that name and said, you need to look into Jodi Arias.
He has an ex-girlfriend that's been bothering him, and do you know the ex-girlfriend's name? Her name is Jodi.
The state of Arizona versus Jodi Ann Arias.
Now, 4.5 years after Jodi Arias was arrested and charged with first-degree murder,
Are we ready for the jury?
the question that needed to be answered was why.
Travis Victor Alexander, an individual that was one of the greatest blessings in her life. Well, she knocked the blessings out of him by putting a bullet in his head.
Prosecutor Juan Martinez wasted no time exposing the jury to the brutal reality of this homicide.
There was a hallway leading off to the bathroom where the shower stall was. That was all covered in blood. I noticed large amounts of blood pooling and smears.
When I first walked through this crime scene in 2008, I was struck by the echoes of the extraordinary struggle that had taken place here. And it was the evidence of that struggle collected at the scene that spoke volumes to the jury.
107 is what?
That's a photograph of the staining on the sink and some of the spatter inside of the sink running down. That is red staining on the tile floor in the bathroom. Red staining that was on the carpet in the master bedroom. Latent print 169A was individualized as the left palm of Jodi Ann Arias.
Is that the bullet?
Yes, it is. This is consistent with the 25 auto bullet.
Did you have occasion to conduct a medical examination on the body of Travis Alexander?
Yes.
One by one, Mesa County Medical Examiner Kevin Horn listed each of Travis Alexander's devastating wounds.
The most significant wounds are going to be the neck wound, the stab wound that penetrates the heart, and then also the gunshot wound.
She really slaughtered him. This was overkill.
Criminal attorney Linda Kenny Bodden, who worked on the defense teams of Casey Anthony and Phil Spector, has seen more than her share of murders, but few like this.
This showed that she was an incredibly angry young woman.
What piece of evidence sticks out the most in your mind?
Well, the piece of evidence that to me is amazing is the slit neck wound.
Why?
Because it was the coup de grace, in my opinion. It was the ultimate control over him. He wasn't going to say anything bad to her ever again. To me, that was just vicious.
Since her arrest in Wairika, California in 2008, Jodi has always insisted that she did not viciously murder Travis Alexander. But her details of how he died have changed repeatedly.
Now, there's a number of stories that you gave in this particular case involving the killing. There was one that you gave to Detective Flores, right?
Yes. He was like on his knees like this, doing something like this or something like, I don't know. And I was like, are you okay? What's going on? What's going on? He's like, go get help, go get help. And I said, okay. And I turned around. There were two people there. One was a guy and one was a girl.
But then you still gave another view of what happened to 48 hours, right?
I think I was inconsistent in my lies, yes.
So let's take a look at what you may have said 48 hours.
In the 25 years that it's been on the air, this is the first time a 48 Hours interview has been used as evidence in a death penalty trial.
I was hit on the back of the head. I don't think I was out very long. But when I came to, Travis was on all fours on the tile. And he was, well, I say all fours, but one of his hands was actually holding his head.
And that's another version of the events that occurred on June 4th of 2008, correct?
Yes.
And they're not true.
Neither of them. Well, it's all the same thing. It's just different versions. Couldn't keep my lies straight.
But Bodden says that her experience with other defendants suggests that the story Jodi told 48 Hours may contain elements of the truth.
Jodi gave us secrets in those interviews. She gave us an insight right into what she is thinking.
She was in the bathroom, standing over Travis, and I charged her.
She talks about having a fight with the woman, and she describes the woman who attacked Travis as being, about her height and Caucasian. Well, that's her.
I ran down that hall, and I pushed her as hard as I could, and she fell over him.
She then talks about power later on in that interview, and she talks about having a gun.
They just kept arguing back and forth whether or not, to kill me.
And if somebody has a gun to your head, you have the ultimate power.
It's like everything just stops when someone else is sitting there with a gun pointed to your head deciding your fate.
So I think that a lot of what she was saying about what happened was what happened with her and Travis the day he died.
Jody's various stories aside, the prosecution says there are critical pieces of evidence that speak for themselves.
These are accidental photographs. These are photographs that the killer did not want taken.
Jody, when she did the interview, she at one point said she likes to document everything.
I've always had my camera, always. So it goes everywhere I go.
So it's kind of amazing that she actually documented herself committing this murder.
This individual's here. You see her foot. You see Mr. Alexander's head. You see his arm. You see him bleeding profusely.
After 9 days and 20 witnesses, Martinez believed his case against Jodi Arias was ironclad.
The state may call its next witness.
The state rests.
Now, despite all the lies and deceitful behavior that the court has heard,
I couldn't hurt Travis. He's done so much for me.
the defense will have to convince the jury that on the day Travis died, it was actually Jodi Arias who was the victim.
Travis flipped out and he stepped out of the shower and he picked me up and he body slammed me again on the tile.
Oh, holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our...
Even in jail, awaiting trial, Jodi Arias had little trouble keeping herself in the spotlight and caught the attention of the media when she won a jailhouse Christmas singing competition.
Well, I appreciate your vote. Thank you very much.
The defense calls Jodi Arias.
Serious, please stand to be sworn.
And when the defense finally presented its case, Jodi took the spotlight again, taking the stand to tell her unbelievable story of self-defense. Among those listening were Jodi's mother, her aunt, and Travis's family.
Did you kill Travis Alexander on June 4th, 2008?
Yes, I did.
Why?
The simple answer is that he attacked me, and I defended myself.
The biggest hurdle is Jodi herself. The fact that
According to trial lawyer Linda Kenny Bodden, putting a defendant like Jodi Arias on the stand can be extremely problematic.
Because then the case only becomes about the client and what she said. And that jury is always going to go back to what Jodi said.
Ms. Arias, you are still under oath. Do you understand?
Yes.
And what Jodi had to say was shocking.
I'm taking pictures of him. We were trying out different poses. And when I went to delete the photos, as I moved the camera, it slipped out of my hand.
So what happens after you drop the camera?
Travis flipped out and he stepped out of the shower and he lifted me up and he body slammed me again on the tile. And I remembered where he kept a gun, so I grabbed it. He was chasing me. I turned around and we were in the middle of the bathroom. I pointed it at him with both of my hands. I thought that would stop him, but he just kept running. I didn't even think I was holding the trigger. I just was pointing it at him. And I didn't even know that I shot him. It just went off. And after I broke away from him, he said, kill you, bitch.
Jodi's memory of how Travis allegedly attacked her was striking. And yet she was at a loss for words when asked to explain her actions.
Once you broke away from him, what do you remember?
Almost nothing.
Do you remember stabbing Travis Alexander?
I have no memory of stabbing him.
Do you remember dragging him across the floor?
No. And I just remember screaming. I don't remember anything after that.
But there are many people that never remember the actual events.
To help the jury understand why Jodi had trouble remembering, the defense called Dr. Richard Samuels, a clinical psychologist who tested Jodi for PTSD.
Her scores on the post-traumatic stress disorder scale confirm the presence of PTSD, right?
Yes.
Samuels concluded that Jodi suffered amnesia from the trauma of the attack.
And it's clear from the research that a large percentage of individuals who are in such settings do not remember or have cloudy and foggy memories of what has transpired.
How many hours did you spend with her?
Between 25 and 30 hours.
But the prosecution insisted that Samuel's diagnosis was flawed, because when he examined Jodi 3 years ago, she still maintained the intruder story.
You affirm the presence of PTSD, even though you've just now told us that this is based on a lie.
Perhaps I should have re-administered that test.
Altered mental states, which are of such magnitude that a person has little or no awareness of their behavior are very, very uncommon.
Dr. Stuart Kleiman is a forensic psychiatrist and consultant for 48 Hours.
So it's very reasonable to conclude this person acted out their rage and told lies about it afterwards.
Jodi Arias claims she not only has no memory of stabbing Travis more than 24 times and slitting his throat, but she also has no memory of altering the scene. It wasn't until after driving hundreds of miles into the desert that her mental fog apparently lifted, and she suddenly realized she had done something horribly wrong.
Did you believe he was alive?
I didn't know, but I didn't think he was. I was scared, and I couldn't imagine calling 911 and telling them what I had just done.
If someone after a crime engages in behavior which suggests an effort to cover it up, then that would not be consistent with amnesia. If you didn't remember what had happened, what's the need to cover up something?
You did grant interviews to people from 48 Hours, didn't you?
Yes.
There were 2 interviews, right?
Yes.
Martinez hoped that by exposing Jodi as a liar, he would discredit her with the jury. And once again presented clips from Jodi's 48 Hours interviews.
Travis's family deserves to know what happened, and because I may be the only person that will ever be able to say what happened that day, I wrote them a letter.
In that letter, you actually tell the family that the people that did it were this male and this female, right?
Yes.
So, you lied to them, didn't you?
Yes.
When you asked me if I was angry or outraged, I'm more angry and outraged that his life was taken and that he had so much potential. I know that I'm innocent, and even though this is a very serious thing to be charged with, there's no reason for me to be sad, because I know that I'd never hurt Travis. I did see Travis the day that he passed away, and a lot of things happened that day. I almost lost my life as well.
Nowhere in that recitation or in any of the interviews that you gave with 48 Hours did you ever indicate that you had memory loss, correct?
That's correct. I have faith that in the end everything will be made known, everything will come out, and in the meantime, smile, say cheese.
It takes a certain kind of person with great chutzpah to go on national television and tell a big lie to the entire world.
Am I allowed to tell you what I'm trying to say?
And Jodi displayed that same tenacity during her 18 days on the witness stand.
You say that you have memory problems, but it depends on the circumstance, right?
That's right.
What factors influence your having a memory problem?
Usually when men like you are screaming at me or grilling me, or someone like Travis doing the same.
So that affects your...
Throughout the heated cross-examination, Martinez vigorously attacked Jodi's story.
Man, were you crying when you were shooting him?
I don't remember.
Were you crying when you were stabbing him?
I don't remember.
How about when you cut his throat? Were you crying then?
I don't know.
But to save their client's life, the defense tried to destroy the only thing left of Travis Alexander, his reputation.
The instances of violence were becoming more frequent and more severe. Fear, love, sex, lies, and dirty little secrets will help you understand, I think, what happened in those 3 minutes.
Jodi's life was in danger. She would either live or she would die.
For the entire time that Jodi Arias' fate hung in the balance in court, her defense was on a mission to save her life.
Jodi had to make a choice.
By proving Travis left Jodi no choice but to defend herself.
The $1 million question is what would have forced her to do it.
Jodi's answer? An accusation of her own.
It was Travis's continual abuse. And on June 4th of 2008, it had reached a point of no return.
Jodi now claimed there was a dark side to Travis, and that she lied to cover up the truth about domestic abuse in their relationship.
Her fear and her panic about what had happened led her to tell different stories. He threatened to kill her, and given her experience with him, she had no reason to not believe him.
It was a challenging defense, one that, in addition to her story of intruders, Jodi may have been considering when she spoke with 48 Hours just after her arrest.
Was he ever abusive to you in any way?
He lost his temper a few times, and it wasn't anything that really required me to, I never felt my life was in danger. I'll say that.
Did you show the physical signs of it?
Yes. but I was able to hide it pretty well, I think.
Arms?
Arms, legs, torso.
But Jody testified to several incidents of alleged abuse.
And he body slammed me on the floor at the foot of his bed. He called me a bitch, and he kicked me in the ribs. He went to kick me again, and I put my hand out, and it clipped my hand and hit my finger.
Defense attorney Kirk Nurmi even had Jody display her injuries to the jury.
Could you hold up your hand for us so we could see? Why didn't you call the police?
I would have never called the police on Travis.
There is no record of Jody reporting this abuse, and his friends, Chris and Sky Hughes, say that is not the Travis they knew.
We've never, ever seen any evidence of abuse. They couldn't find one human, other than Jody, who we know is a liar. They couldn't find one person that had a story of being abused by Travis.
She's making it up as she's going along.
And they say Jody's most appalling lie came next.
I walked in and Travis started grabbing at something on the bed. It was a photograph.
What was the photograph of?
It was a picture of a little boy. He was dressed in underwear. He seemed very ashamed with himself.
She's saying this whole time she knew he was a pedophile. They're just lies.
You saw him do that. That's a lie, isn't it, ma'am?
I wish it was a lie.
Prosecutor Martinez wasn't buying it either.
It is a hateful allegation with nothing to support it. It's so easy for her to make these allegations. It's so easy for her to get on the witness stand, as you've seen, and lie. And this is really the pinnacle.
Trial attorney Linda Kenny Bodden says if the defense could not prove Jody's allegations, they would come back to haunt her.
To say that she was physically abused and she was fighting for her life that day and that's why she had to kill him, that's just going to get the jury angry.
And do you believe, in your expert opinion, that Jody was a battered woman, or is a battered woman?
Yes, I do.
To convince jurors that Jody was a battered woman, her attorney Jennifer Wilmot called domestic violence expert Alice LaViolette, who testified for several days.
How would you characterize their relationship at this point in time, given your expertise in the area?
I would call it a domestically abusive relationship.
LaViolette testified that Jody and Travis's relationship was abusive both verbally.
Does he call her names like bitch?
Yes.
And calling her a whore?
Yes.
And physically.
He grabbed her by the shoulders, threw her to the ground, and then told her she wasn't leaving. And when she hits the floor, she makes a sound, and he says, basically, don't act like that, hurts, bitch.
As a defense attorney, how would you use this relationship between the two of them?
You can't go after a victim. Going after a victim in a courtroom, you might as well just turn in your license, really. So you have to be able to be very soft with regard to Travis here.
Do you feel a need?
The prosecutor was anything but soft during heated cross-examination.
You actually are biased in favor of the defendant, aren't you?
I don't believe I'm biased. You're mischaracterizing what I do, Mr. Martinez.
One of the questions here is, why is it that you felt the need to coddle her?
Mr. Martinez, are you angry at me?
Ma'am, is that relevant to you? Is that important to you? Does that make any difference to your evaluation, whether or not the prosecutor is angry? Yes or no?
If you were in my group, I would ask you to take a time out, Mr. Martinez.
More layers of Arias's complicated psyche were peeled away when the state called its expert witness, Dr. Janine DeMarte.
This reporting of domestic violence has changed over time frequently. My opinion is that there did not appear to be significant abuse.
DeMarte also dismissed defense claims that Jody suffered memory loss from post-traumatic stress.
She indicated to me that she had a very large gap in her memory. That's not how it typically presents with traumatic memories.
Instead, DeMarte testified that tests she administered suggest Jody may have a borderline personality disorder.
You could see it in her journal entries that went from happy to sad very quickly. There is some indication that she has some anger problems, that she had some strong feelings of anger internally.
She couldn't let him go. Even from Wairika, she couldn't let him go.
The prosecutor said Jody's desire to be with Travis had no bounds, and she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted.
Her motivation for this was that she just wanted him.
You don't think she could have just snapped?
No, this was a buildup that led to her ultimately making a decision in a passionate way.
By continuing to have sex with Jody on and off for at least 9 months after they broke up, Bodden says Travis may have unknowingly sent Jody mixed signals.
He really didn't know and probably didn't care because when you're young and you're having sex, the way Jody made it very easy for him, and he didn't realize that he had this rattlesnake by the neck. Whatever he did fed into her craziness, fed into her insanity, fed into her desire that she wanted him and she wanted to control him and she wanted to have a life with him. It was the perfect storm that something had to happen.
She had a vision that they were going to get married. And from that point, she would not let that go and she would not let Travis go. Jody could not deal with the rejection. Lots of people told Jody to move on. And she said, I can't. He'd be the most amazing husband. I can't picture anyone else being the father of my children. She was obsessed.
Dr. Stuart Kleinman says obsession can have dangerous consequences.
If a person has an intense need for something and a clear, consistent boundary is put up by another individual, that will probably help both of those individuals. And ultimately, if that need is never going to really be satisfied, create an intense level of rage.
Was sex a tool for Jody? Of course it was. But was Travis playing with fire? Absolutely.
For the families of Jodi Arias and Travis Alexander, enduring the trial was a trial in itself.
What are we looking at here?
That's the shower stall with the body crammed down to the bottom of it.
Oh, it's very, very hard. I mean, they're never going to get over this.
Trial attorney Linda Kenny Bodden knows the price both families paid.
Just as much as Travis lost his life, there's going to be parts of that family that have died in the process.
It's just a horrible, horrible thing happened to the best person.
It was an unthinkable crime, as Travis's siblings Samantha and Stephen told us in 2008.
And you would never in a million years think that that would happen to Travis, because things like this don't happen to people like Travis.
And you're the one that did this, right?
Yes.
The family of Jodi Arias has had to endure their own torment. First, watching as she was cast as a cold-blooded killer.
And you would acknowledge that a lot of the stab wounds were to the back of the head and to the back of the torso, correct?
Okay.
No,
I don't count them. I don't know. Let's take your word for it.
And then hearing Jodi tell the world that she has been abused her entire life.
You told us that your dad hit you with the belt.
Yes.
After age 7.
Yes.
Did he leave welts?
He didn't leave welts as often as my mom. She also used to belt. My dad was very intimidating, so I don't think he needed to hit us quite as hard to get the point across. My mom didn't carry that fear factor with her, so I think she used more force.
She's lying. She's making it all up. And she staged her defense by lies.
Do you think jurors are impacted by family who are in the courtroom, their reaction to, say, crime scene photos or even testimony by the defendant?
I think they are, but then they do a very good job of compartmentalizing it.
Jury expert Richard Gabriel, who has worked with the defense teams for Casey Anthony and O.J. Simpson, says jurors are able to separate themselves from courtroom drama.
Does it impact them when they hear sobs in the galley? Yes, they absolutely hear that, but they do a pretty good job of trying to divorce themselves from that.
The jury's not going to feel sorry for Jodi. They can only feel sorry for her family and hope that the sorrow they feel for her family is more merciful than what she felt for Travis.
And during her 18 days on the stand, Bodden says Jodi thought she could win the mercy of the jury.
Some defendants are manipulative, and they think they can manipulate the police, and they also then think they can manipulate the courtroom, and that's the problem. You can't manipulate everybody.
Her being on the stand for so long was just disgusting.
Travis's friends, Chris and Sky Hughes, believe Jodi relished her months in the spotlight.
She enjoyed it. She enjoyed every moment of it. She enjoyed the attention. She enjoyed toying with people. She enjoyed, looking over and making up these just disgusting stories for the jury.
Jodi may have felt there was no question she would be found innocent, but the jurors had some questions of their own. Over 200 questions read by the judge.
How could you kiss another man when you knew what you just did to Travis?
Arizona is only one of 3 states that allows jurors to ask questions.
Why were you afraid of the consequences if you killed Travis in self-defense? You said that one of your worst fears was for everyone to find out what was going on in your relationship. So why did you talk to 48 Hours and other TV stations?
I thought that the jurors in this case asked better questions than the prosecutor or the defense many times.
Bodden says those jury questions were telling.
They really got to the heart of the matter.
After all the lies you have told, why should we believe you now?
The lies that I've told in this case are can be tied directly back to either protecting Travis's reputation or my involvement in his death.
In the end, both sides agreed. It came down to one question. Do you believe Jodi Arias?
She premeditated it. You now have a duty. You are to reach a decision as to whether or not the defendant committed first-degree murder.
So what I'm saying to you, ladies and gentlemen, is ultimately, if Miss Arias is guilty of any crime at all, it is the crime of manslaughter and nothing more.
But for the family and friends of Travis Alexander, there was no debate, and there never had been. There was only one verdict, one punishment appropriate for Jodi Arias.
I want the maximum that the law will allow.
Ultimately, I really hope that she gets the death penalty.
Justice, and what it would finally look like, would depend on just which Jodi Arias the jury in this tense Phoenix courtroom ultimately bought into.
She does seem to adapt, which is why I think she's like a praying mantis here, is that she is a chameleon.
Jodi's a manipulator, and that's what she does.
Through 18 days of her testimony, the world had witnessed the many faces of Jodi Arias.
She's always reading the environment, right? Trying to determine how she's supposed to act. She's always trying to be something that she's not, right?
When I see Jodi Arias, I just feel utter disgust. Like, she's not human, you know? She doesn't feel like normal people feel.
And she's over here, so...
For Travis Alexander's loved ones, Jodi Arias is nothing but a fake.
Don't be fooled by Jodi's sweet demeanor. She's a liar, and she's evil. And she deserves to be judged and convicted.
Who do you think killed him? I have no idea.
The stories told by the 32-year-old California waitress were consistent, with just one thing: a defendant who lied from the start.
She did nothing about the truth to my mom began to carry a wooden spoon in her purse.
To family.
Were you at Travis's house?
To the police.
Absolutely not.
And to 48 Hours.
How do you feel about being accused of this crime?
I know that I won't be held accountable for killing him because I had nothing to do with that. I had everything to lose and nothing to gain if I were to kill Travis.
Can I get those off you?
It seems like a lifetime ago.
I didn't kill Travis.
But it was only 4 years.
If a conviction happens, I know that I won't be the first person to be wrongly convicted and possibly wrongly sentenced for either life in prison or the death penalty.
Then that story evaporated in the Arizona desert. What was left was an admission.
And that's when you shot him in the face, right?
Yeah, that's when the gun went off.
And an excuse.
And he's just screaming angry. It had already almost killed me.
We are so very thankful for the opportunity to gather here as friends. Travis.
For those who loved him,
The
thought that Travis Alexander somehow had it coming to him was the final crime against a murdered man.
She slaughtered him on June 4th, and then she has slaughtered him every day for the last 5 years with the lies that she's told.
After 3 days of deliberations, there was a verdict.
State of Arizona versus Jodi Ann Arias, verdict, count 1. We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn, in the above entitled action, upon our oaths, do find the defendant as to count 1, first-degree murder, guilty.
Guilty of first-degree murder, the highest charge the jury had. The death penalty was now on the table. Jodi Arias seemed shocked, holding back tears of sadness, while Travis's family could not hold back their tears of joy.
I'd rather have Travis Alexander back. I'd rather have my money back, but we can't have him back. So I'm as happy as I can be given the circumstances.
A week after the verdict, the sentencing phase begins with the prosecutor trying to convince the jury Jodi Arias deserves death.
The last thing that Mr. Alexander felt was this knife coming towards him.
The first decision comes quickly. The jury rules the murder was especially cruel, clearing the way for the penalty phase.
Is this your true verdict, so say you want it all?
Yes.
The jury heard from those who loved Travis Alexander, his brother Stephen.
Why him?
Unfortunately, I won't ever get the answers to most of my questions. Questions like how much did he suffer?
His sister, Samantha.
Travis was not shy. He was full of life.
And the jury heard from the defense that Arias would testify one more time.
And talk to you about how she viewed her life.
That should be next week, when we may also find out whether Jodi Arias lives in this Arizona prison for a minimum of 25 years or dies here. 4 years ago, she seemed to sense her fate.
If I had my choice, I would take the death penalty because I don't want to spend the rest of my life in prison.
And after her guilty verdict, Arias seemed almost wistful in talking to a local reporter.
I believe death is the ultimate freedom, so I'd rather just have my freedom as soon as I can get it.
Freedom wasn't an option for Travis Alexander. He was home in Riverside, California. His image, silent and cold, carved in stone. And soon, we'll see if Jodi Arias... As prosecutors prepared for trial, District Attorney Scott Story worried about their purely circumstantial case.
In today's world, with like the CSI shows and those kinds of shows, jurors want more than just circumstantial evidence.
Their best hope? To somehow get one of the DeWilds to turn on the others. Investigators say it was just a matter of finding the weakest link.
Did you think Roseanne was going to turn against her husband and her brother-in-law?
I thought there was a possibility Roseanne would.
And did she?
No.
Instead, in a stunning turn of events, it was Roseanne's husband, David, who suddenly broke down. 9 years after Heather was killed, David DeWild admitted that he hid her body after his twin brother, Dan, killed her.
I just found the pieces.
Roseanne claims that until that moment, she never guessed the two brothers were involved in Heather's death.
It's hard to explain my feeling. Denial. No, it's not true, but it was true.
With David finally ready to talk, it fell to Russ Boatwright to uncover all the details. According to David, Dan began planning Heather's death in April of 2003, after he was ordered to pay child support.
And that's when I started to realize that this was actually a well-thought-out plan.
But why would David go through with this and help his brother?
I think David describes it as, I'm trying to talk him out of it most of the time, but he said when Daniel told him, look, I'm doing this with you or without you, he said at that point he made a decision to help his brother. He said he knew if his brother did this on his own, he would get caught.
I'm Investigator Boatwright. Today's date is August 4th, 2012. Present is David DeWild. He's going to walk through what occurred during the time that Heather was murdered.
A clean-shaven David DeWild agreed to take investigators back to the scene of the crime, the DeWild's garage, to show exactly where and how Heather was killed.
You could tell it impacted him. You could tell he was upset going back in there again.
Let's start at the beginning with where you talked.
A warning. Some of what David is about to tell is disturbing to hear.
We're going to jump ahead to the point where you're waiting for Heather's arrival. Okay.
According to the plan, Heather and the kids arrived at noon on July 24th, 2003. As Dan went to meet them, David says he tried to stop his brother.
And I stop him right when he's walking up, and I'm in his way, and I say, Dan, don't do this. But he was very calm.
As the children played in the house, Heather followed her husband Dan into the garage. Prosecutor Robert Weiner believes Dan lured her there with a promise to return the sex tape the couple had made.
He knew he had to use something to get her into that garage, and that was that tape, because she wanted that tape back.
The door opens, Heather walks through, and she says, "What did you want to show me out here?" And my brother walks through, closes the door, grabs her by both shoulders, throws her down hard, and she just hit her like Pearl Harbor. She didn't know that was going to happen. And then she goes to get up like this, and she looks at me, and I look at her.
At that moment, David could have stopped Heather's murder, but he didn't.
She knew something was going to happen, was just about to happen, and kind of looked to him to say, help me here. And he said, I didn't do anything. I didn't do a thing to help her.
And he takes a mallet off the counter, and she's trying to get back up. Whack her. She drops. He tosses the hammer down. He takes his noose, puts it around her neck.
Dan then hanged Heather from the rafters.
I guess cinches it up. Comes over and pulls on the rope.
My jaw dropped. Are you kidding me? At that point, he began to stage her body by tying her and making it look like it was a bonded sex act gone bad. Daniel proceeds to place her body in trash bags.
As Heather's children continue to play elsewhere in the house, David abandoned Heather's car at the apartment complex parking lot. By the time David returned, Dan had already placed his wife's body in the back of the Suburban.
I just make sure she's not breathing or anything, I put my hand on her. That is what I remember.
As David tells it, the brothers were bound by their terrible secret, and he revealed how he and Dan managed to erase all evidence of Heather's brutal murder.
They were watching crime shows, the CSI type shows, any crime shows that they could watch and learn. So they double gloved. They had 2 sets of gloves on because they didn't want to leave any trace evidence. They didn't want to leave blood.
I'd say it was a single strike to the head. Explains the lack of spatter at the scene. First hit's free. Killer knew what he was doing.
And Heather's body might never have been found if David had made it to a pre-planned burial site. Instead, transmission problems with his Suburban forced him to hide her along that canyon road, where Curtis Johnson discovered her. The prosecution believed they finally knew how Heather had been killed. But could they trust David?
David's lied for 9 years.
He's a liar.
He is a liar, and he's certainly capable of lying.
So before they gave him a deal, David had to pass a polygraph. How did he do?
He passed on the issues as far as killing Heather.
But were there some areas that he failed or that were inconsistent?
He had some issues on some other questions, primarily the involvement of others.
On the issue of Roseanne?
Yes.
But Roseanne will not go on trial after all. Although prosecutors maintain she was not part of any deal, after spending more than 8 months in jail, all charges against her were dismissed for lack of evidence. Do you have any regret about putting her in jail for 8 months?
Oh, no. I was very confident that after the fact that she had some knowledge and that very likely she had some participation of one degree or another. We just couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
It's hard to believe that a woman who was in the house when Heather was killed and was married to one of the killers would know nothing, see nothing. But that's exactly what Roseanne says. Roseanne, did you have anything to do with Heather's death and her disappearance?
I did not. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't know anything.
You think there's still some people who think you do?
I'm sure.
As they head to trial, the prosecution is counting on David to convict his twin brother.
It's kind of like dancing with the devil.
In this situation, we, I guess, had agreed to make a deal with the devil's twin.
Nine and a half years after Heather DeWild was murdered, her husband Dan finally goes on trial at the Jefferson County Courthouse. Defense attorney Tom Ward.
There was a kind of tension in the air that I've never felt in a courtroom before.
There are no cameras allowed, but the courtroom is packed.
I was worried. I didn't know what I was going to find out.
The state's most important witness, David DeWild, is about to testify against his identical twin brother. Without forensic evidence, the whole case rides on David.
I watched him come in, and I was holding my fingers and crossing my toes. And...
Prosecutor Robert Weiner. You saw him look at his brother?
Yeah.
And you're wondering, oh my gosh, will he lose his nerve?
That's exactly what I was thinking. And then I asked him who killed Heather.
And what did David say?
He pointed to his brother.
David tells the court that it was his twin brother who killed his wife in the garage and that he just went along with it. But Dan's defense attorney claims his client is completely innocent. that Dan never knew where Heather went after she left his house on July 24th, 2003.
She didn't say exactly where she was going. He expected her back in a couple of hours, and she never came back, and he didn't know what happened to her. The story Dan told was always consistent. It never changed.
In fact, Dan's defense is that it's David who killed Heather. Just look at David's actions that day.
David, by his own admission, is responsible for getting rid of the car. He's responsible for getting rid of the body. All of those things are very hard to believe that someone would do if they weren't the perpetrator.
But why would David kill his brother's wife?
David DeWild says that he always felt that Heather was attracted to him. That there was a possibility that after Dan and Heather's divorce was final, that he and Heather would be able to get together. There's no other evidence of any of this besides what David DeWild says about it, so I question whether he had some sort of an obsession with Heather.
And he killed her because she wouldn't respond to him.
It's possible.
But Prosecutor Weiner says that's absurd.
I don't think there's any way David could have done it by himself. In looking at the dynamics, it became pretty clear that David was set up by Daniel. Daniel is the controlling one. David wasn't going to lose his house. Daniel was losing his house. David had absolutely no motive, none whatsoever, to kill Heather.
What's more, says Weiner, why would a man who got away with a murder for almost a decade suddenly tell investigators a story where he implicates himself?
He throws himself under the bus more than anybody else does. He could have very easily fashioned a story that made this look like an accident.
But defense attorney Tom Ward claims David turned against his brother Dan because he got a great plea deal. Instead of life, he got just 12 years.
He was able to give a statement that completely pinned the entire murder on his brother Dan, and at the same time completely exonerated his wife Roseanne, whose case was dismissed.
What's more, Ward says, it's David who has a history of violence. He was married once before and attacked his wife.
David at one point tried to choke his wife and had his hands around her neck until she passed out and said, "Next time I'll kill you, bitch."
The jury won't hear the most shocking claim David makes against his twin brother. He says that Dan proposed teaming up to kill each other's ex-wives. That in Dan's mind, committing murder beats paying child support.
I was shocked. When David told me that, I thought, you have got to be kidding me. Apparently Daniel, according to David, had worked the whole thing out in his head.
The judge rules that information is just too prejudicial. Instead, it's left to Prosecutor Weiner in his closing to remind the jury which twin he's convinced was pulling the strings.
Dan DeWild is a cool, calculated killer.
On Friday, November 16, 2012, after a 2-week trial, the case goes to the jury.
One of the first things we did was take kind of a straw poll. There were 6 people who voted that they weren't sure and 6 people who thought straight away he was guilty.
As time goes, I'm getting more and more nervous.
Are you worried that the jury is just going to not know who actually killed Heather?
Yes, that occurred to me in the courtroom. That it's going to be a problem. And it was.
On the second day of deliberations, the vote is now 10 guilty, 2 not sure.
The 2 jurors came back and they were completely shut down. They said, we don't think that there's enough evidence.
The holdouts wouldn't talk to us, but the others say it all comes down to David DeWild's credibility. Did he downplay his own involvement in Heather's murder to get a plea deal and get his wife Roseanne out of prison?
They felt that David had too much to gain, so David could have done it. And I think the point that the other 10 of us had arrived at was it didn't matter at that point in time because they were both involved.
I think they must have felt like they needed to know exactly what happened, and they had to have a piece of direct evidence of that happening.
Yeah.
And the rest of us didn't.
It wasn't their job to connect the dots.
The prosecutors had to do it for them.
I was incredibly frustrated because I had committed to think for myself, and I felt that they didn't do their duty.
The jurors are able to agree on 2 lesser charges. They all believe that Dan DeWild planned to kill his wife and that he helped cover up the crime. But they're hopelessly deadlocked on whether Dan is the twin who murdered Heather. Darren, how heated did it get?
I walked out and I said, if you guys are truly done, then...
I feel horrible about the pain.
Could you have convicted Dan?
Real people, real crimes, real life drama.
When I heard that they were going to take me by helicopter to the hospital, I knew right then that they didn't think that I was going to make it. They only airlift patients who are so severe that they're about to die. I remember thinking at one point, he is doing exactly what he said he was going to do. He always told me that if I was to break up with him, he would come back and kill me. On January 24th, 2012, I walked outside my home. It was a very dark and eerie night. There was not a sound in the neighborhood. And no one knew I was out there. I went outside to meet Robert Burton in the hopes that he would really leave me alone forever. He said that he just wanted a hug. That's all he wanted. A final goodbye. All he wanted was closure. And I basically, walked outside to my murder. And, I walked up to him. He looked kind of empty. No emotion. Absolutely nothing in his eyes. Just soulless. He was just blank face. And he put his arms around me for a hug. Squeezed me a little bit. And I didn't even say a word. He never said anything, and I never said anything. I heard it click. I didn't know what the sound was. He just started stabbing me with that knife. It just kept coming at my face. I knew my face was completely covered in blood, and my hair felt soaking wet. It was seriously like dripping wet, like I just got out of the shower. I'm just trying to scream, and I try and crawl, and I wasn't getting anywhere. I felt myself dying, so I couldn't really breathe. I felt myself...
Melissa Dohm was viciously stabbed 32 times simply for ending a relationship. It's a disturbing trend known as breakup violence. I'm Troy Roberts. Some of the images you'll see are tough to look at, but Melissa wants you to see them. With violence against women dominating the headlines, she says we can't afford to turn away.
It was a Tuesday morning, approximately 3:18 a.m. I was dispatched to a 911 call of a female that was stabbed.
She's laying in the street dead. I want to kill her. Oh my God.
As I came around the west side of the park, I saw something moving on the side of the road in the grass. And as I got closer, I realized it was a female, and she was screaming for help. And she was reaching up to me, begging me to help her. When I first saw Melissa, she was covered in blood. To this day, I've never seen anyone injured so badly as she was. I honestly didn't believe Melissa would survive. I asked her who did this to her. And initially, I thought she said, Robbie Merton. So I repeated back to her, Robbie Merton. And she said, no. Finally, she says, B. Burton. And I spelled it back to her, B-U-R-T-O-N. And she said yes. And it was just the relief on her face that I'd finally gotten what it was she was trying to say to me. She told me Robert Burton was her ex-boyfriend. As Melissa was giving me the information regarding Robert Burton's appearance and what he was driving, I was giving a bolo, or be on the lookout, on the radio to other officers that were in the area. It was my intention for other officers to hopefully be able to locate him, but also to let them know that he's definitely armed. He's definitely dangerous. He has the ability to kill. I asked Melissa, what did he stab you with? A small knife, a large knife? She said, both. When she said that to me, it just gave me chills. I don't know, I just felt so bad for her.
When I got to Melissa's side, I kneeled down. She looked at me, and she grabbed my arm, and she said, "Help me, I'm dying." The look in her eye was pure terror, and it's a look I'll never forget. She had multiple teeth knocked out. She had lacerations to the left side of her face. She had long blonde hair, and it was absolutely drenched, soaked in blood, which made it very difficult to actually see the wounds. So I had to go more hands-on. I was feeling her head, and actually you could feel where the knife penetrated her skull, where your fingertips would actually slide in to where the knife stabbed her. Our biggest concern was her blood loss. We can control the blood that we see, but it's the bleeding that we don't see that's going to kill her. We knew she needed to get to a trauma center and get to a trauma center quickly, so I called for a helicopter. So I continued patient care on scene. Melissa's awake, she's alert, which is amazing. Her will to survive was strong. The defense wounds on both arms were just very, very traumatic. Both arms were basically butchered. You know, she put up one hell of a fight.
I was awakened by the Clearwater Police Department yelling "Clearwater Police" and banging frantically on my door. Policeman asked me if I was Joanne Dohm, and I said yes. And he said, "Your daughter's been stabbed." He said, "Hurry up, I want to take you to her." He hurried me across the yard, and then I realized he wanted me to see her before she died. I saw her slippers, and I'm like, she obviously ran out of them. They were several feet apart, and I said, "Oh, she just got those for Christmas." As I approached the scene, I passed a police car, and then we went around the crime tape, and then I went under it, and they were putting Melissa in an ambulance. And
I hadn't seen Robert Burton in about 3 months when he began calling me over and over out of the blue. Woke me up in the middle of the night. And he said that he just wanted a hug. That's all he wanted. And I'm like, "No, leave me alone. I have class. Like, seriously, stop." And he began to cry. He was saying, "After everything we've been through for the last 2 years, you can't just give me a hug." It just seemed kind of pathetic, and I really just wanted to get it over with so I can go back to sleep. So I reluctantly agreed when I walked outside. My gut was saying this isn't right, but now I'm already out here. He sees me, so I'm like, just let's get this over with. Like a blur, and I remember like pieces of it. Immediately stabbed me right here in the back of my shoulder, and then right here in the back of my neck. Knife just kept coming down at me, and I remember hearing my skull crack over like all of my, it just kept coming at my face, and then my mouth filled with blood. Oh my God, you know, he's going to kill me. This is a fight for my life. Like, I have to scream, I have to run. I was losing blood everywhere, and I kept trying to like crawl away from him. You know, he was just so weak. I felt that I was gonna die right there. I remember seeing a girl, and I saw the phone in her hand, so I knew help's coming. This girl, my angel, whoever she is, you know, is going to call for help. The first time I had to face Robert Burton in court was at a hearing.
Isa, 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 Donna, Oklahoma, Donna, Somas, Oklahoma, Donna E. Yuri, Zokanaz, Somas, Rogan, Isa, Yuri, Isa, Alamaz, Holmes, Donna E. Alamaz, Oklahoma, Holmes, Rogan, Holmes, Alamaz, Isa, Oklahoma, Isa, Somas, Alamaz, Isa, Hilare, Somas, Hilare, Donna E. Alamaz, Donna E. Isa, Alamaz, Alamaz, Yuri, Isa, Alamaz, Yuri, Oklahoma, Alamaz, Zokonta, Alamaz, Zokonta, Oklahoma, Somas, E. Rogan, Yuri, Rogan, Isa, Alamaz, Somas, Alamaz, Zokonta, Oklahoma, Rogan, Alamaz, Donna E. Alamaz, Zokonta, Isa, Alamaz, Hilare, Isa, Alamaz, Donna E. Zokonta, Alamaz, Isa, Alamaz, Yuri, Hilare, Isa, Oklahoma, Alamaz, Oklahoma, Hilare, Alamaz, Donna, Alamaz, Rogan, Hilare, Donna, Oklahoma, Donna, Zokonta, Alamaz, Donna, Rogan, Zokonta, Hilare, Zokonta, Alamaz, Somas, Yuri, Donna E. Holmes, Alamaz, Isa, Zokonta, Hilare, Oklahoma, Hilare, Somas, Alamaz, Zokonta, Oklahoma, Zokonta, Yuri, Zokonta, Hilare, Holmes, Hilare, Donna E. Rogan, Zokonta, Donna, Zokonta. Oklahoma, Hilare, Alamaz, Somas, Hilare, Alamaz, Somas. Somas. Rogan? Yuri. Donna E. Hilare. Somas. Rogan? Hilare. Holmes. Zokonta. Rogan? Zokonta. Alamaz, Somas, Alamaz, Holmes, Zokonta, Holmes, Oklahoma, Donna, Holmes, Rose, Ibertane, Alamaz, Hilare, Holmes, Alamaz, Rogan, Oklahoma, Papadakis, Donna, Holmes, Redkit, Rogan, Donna, Redkit, Rogan, Alamaz, Somas, Redkit, Papadakis, Oklahoma, Redkit, Papadakis, Donna, Papadakis. Rudkin. Holman. Donna Papadakis. Rudkin. Holman. Holman. Laurie. Holman. Oklahoma. Donna Laurie. Alamos. Holman. Donna Erie. Holman. Holman. Donna E. Holman. Rogan? Holman. Oklahoma. Oklahoma.